Men who choose women who love too much. She's the rock that I lean on. She's the sunshine of my day. And I don't care what you say about her. Lord, she took me in and made me everything I am today. She's my rock. How does it work for the man involved? What is his experience of the chemistry that occurs in the first few moments of meeting a woman who loves too much? And what happens to his feelings as the relationship continues? Especially if he begins to change and becomes either healthier or sicker. Some of the men whose interviews follow have gained an unusual degree of self-knowledge, as well as a considerable insight into the patterns of their relationships with the women who have been their partners. Several of these men who are recovering from addictions have the benefit of years of therapeutic involvement in Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, and are thus able to identify the appeal the co-alcoholic woman held for them, as they sank into or were already caught in the web of addiction. Others, who have not had problems with addiction, have nevertheless had involvement with more traditional kinds of therapy, which helped them understand themselves and their relationships better. Though the details differ from story to story, always present is the appeal of the strong woman who somehow promises to make up for what each man is lacking in himself or his life. Tom, 48, sober for 12 years, father died of alcoholism, as did an older brother. I remember the night I met Elaine. It was at a dance at the country club. We were both in our early 20s, and both with dates. My drinking was already a problem. I'd had one arrest for drunken driving at 20 and 2 years. Later a serious car accident, which happened because I'd had too much to drink. But of course I didn't think alcohol was doing me any harm at all. I was just a young man on the way up who knew how to have a good time. Elaine was with an acquaintance of mine, who introduced us. She was very attractive and I was happy when we did that, changing partners for one dance, kind of thing. Naturally, I'd been drinking that night, so I felt a little bold. Since I wanted to impress her while we were dancing, I tried some steps that were pretty fancy. I was trying so hard to be suave that I literally ran into another couple and knocked the wind right out of the woman. I was really embarrassed and couldn't say much except to sort of mumble that I was sorry, but Elaine never missed a beat. She took the woman by the arm, apologized to her and her partner, and walked them to their seats. She was so sweet that the husband was probably glad the whole thing happened. Then she came back, very concerned about me, too. Another woman might have been angry and never spoken to me again. Well, I wasn't about to let her get away. After that, her father and I always got along great, until he died. Of course, he was an alcoholic, too. And my mother loved Elaine. She kept telling her that I needed someone like her to look after me. For a long time Elaine kept covering up for me the way she had that first night, when she finally got help for herself and stopped making it easy for me to continue drinking. I told her she didn't love me anymore and ran off with my 22-year-old secretary. After that I went downhill fast. It was 6 months later that I attended my first AA meeting, and I've been sober ever since. Elaine and I got back together after I'd been sober a year. It was real hard, but there was still a great deal of love there. We're not the same people who married 20 years ago, but we both like ourselves and each other better than we did then, and we work on being honest with each other every day. Tom's attraction to Elaine. What happened between Tom and Elaine is typical of what happens between an alcoholic and a co-alcoholic on first meeting. He gets in trouble and she, rather than being offended, figures out how to help him, how to cover things over and make him and everyone else comfortable. She provides a feeling of safety, which for him has powerful appeal since his life is becoming unmanageable. When Elaine joined Al-Anon and learned to stop actually helping Tom stay sick by covering up for him, he did what many addicts do when their partners begin to recover. He retaliated as dramatically as he could, and since for Every male alcoholic, there are plenty of female co-alcoholics looking for someone to save. He quickly found Elaine's replacement, another woman who was willing to continue the kind of rescuing and enabling that Elaine now refused to do for him. He also got so much sicker that his choices narrowed down to two: to begin to recover or to die. Only when his alternatives were that bleak did he become willing to change. The relationship is currently intact, owing to both these people's involvement in the anonymous programs, AA for Tom, Al-Anon for Elaine. There they are learning, for the first time in their lives, to relate to each other in a healthy, non-manipulative way. Charles, 65, retired civil engineer with 2 children, divorced, remarried, and now widowed. Helen has been dead for 2 years now, and I'm finally beginning to sort it all out. I never thought I'd see a therapist, not at my age. But after her death I was so angry it scared me. I couldn't stop feeling I wanted to hurt her. I had dreams about hitting her and I'd wake up yelling at her. I thought I was going crazy. Finally I got the nerve to tell my doctor. He's as old and conservative as I am, so when he told me I'd better get some counseling I swallowed my pride and did it. I contacted the hospice people in town and they put me in touch with a therapist who specializes in helping people get through grief. Well, we worked on my grief and it still kept coming up as anger, so finally I started accepting that I was mad as hell and began with the help of the therapist to look at why. Helen was my second wife. My first wife, Janet, still lives here in town with her new husband. I guess new is a funny word to use. All this happened 25 years ago. I met Helen when I was a civil engineer for the county. She was a secretary in the planning department and I used to see her at work sometimes and maybe once or twice a week at lunchtime in a little coffee shop downtown. She was a very pretty woman, always beautifully dressed, and a little shy but friendly, too. I could tell she liked me just by the way she looked at me and smiled. I guess I was a little flattered that she noticed me. I knew she was divorced with 2 kids, and I felt kind of sorry for her, having to raise them all alone. Anyway, one day I offered to buy her coffee and we had a nice little talk. I made it clear I was married, but I guess I griped a little bit too much about some of the frustrations of married life. I still don't know how she managed to convey the message that day that I was too wonderful a man to ever be unhappy, but I left that coffee shop feeling 10 feet tall and wanting to see her again, wanting to feel the way she had made me feel appreciated. Maybe it was because she didn't have a man in her life and she missed that, but I sure felt big and strong and special after our little talk. Still, I had no intention of getting involved. I'd never done anything like that before. I'd come out of the army after the war and settled down with the wife I'd left waiting for me. Janet and I weren't the happiest couple, but we weren't the unhappiest either. I never thought I'd run around on her. Helen had been married twice before and had suffered a lot in each marriage. Both men had walked out on her, and she'd had a child by each. Now she was raising her children alone, without any support. The worst thing we could have done was get involved with each other. I felt so sorry for her, but I knew that I had nothing to offer her. In those days you couldn't get a divorce just because you wanted one, and I certainly didn't make enough money to lose everything I had and then start over with another family to support in addition to my own. Besides, I really didn't want a divorce. I wasn't crazy about my wife anymore, but I loved my kids and I liked what we all had together. All that began to change, though, as Helen and I continued to see each other. Neither of us could quit. Helen was lonely and said she'd rather have a little bit of me than nothing, and I knew she meant it. Once I had begun with Helen, there was no way out without hurting someone terribly. Pretty soon I felt like the worst kind of heel. Both these women were counting on me and I was letting both of them down. Helen was mad about me. She'd do anything to see me When I tried to break it off, I'd see her at work. And her sweet, sad face would just break my heart. Well, after a year or so, Janet found out about us and told me to stop seeing Helen or leave. I tried to stop, but couldn't stick to it. Besides, everything between Janet and me was so different now. There seemed to be less reason than ever to let go of Helen. It's a long story. Helen and I had a 9-year affair, while my wife tried very hard first to keep me in the marriage, and then to punish me for leaving her. Helen and I lived together on and off several times during those years until Janet finally got tired and agreed to a divorce. I still hate to think about what it did to all of us. In those days, people did not just live together. I think I really lost all my pride during those years. I was ashamed for myself, for my kids, for Helen and her kids, even for Janet, who had never done anything to deserve all this. Finally, after Janet quit fighting it and the divorce was final, Helen and I got married. But something was different between us as soon as the divorce was in the works. All those years, Helen had been warm and loving and seductive. Very seductive. Of course I loved it. All that loving was what kept me with her in spite of the pain to my kids, my wife, her, and her kids, all of us. She made me feel like the most desirable man in the world. Of course, we had fought before we got married, because the tension was terrible, but our fights always ended with lovemaking, and I felt more wanted and needed and cared for than I ever had in my life. Somehow, what Helen and I had together seemed so special, so right, that the price we were paying almost seemed worth it. But when we finally could be together and begin to hold our heads up, Helen cooled off. She still went to work, looking great, but at home she was careless about her appearance. I didn't mind, but I did notice. And sex slowed way down. She wasn't interested anymore. I tried not to pressure her, but it was frustrating to me. I was finally feeling less guilty and more ready to really enjoy being with her both at home and out in the world, and she was pulling away. Within 2 years we had separate bedrooms. And it went on like that, cool and distant, until she died. I never really thought of leaving. I'd paid such a price to be with her, how could I? When I look back, I realized that Helen suffered probably more than I did. Through all those years of our affair, she never really knew whether I'd leave Janet or leave her. She used to cry a lot. And a couple of times she threatened suicide. She hated being the other woman. But as awful as those years before our marriage were, they were more loving and caring and exciting and special than anything afterward. I felt like such a failure after we married, that somehow I couldn't make her happy now that most of our problems were behind us. I came to understand a lot about myself in therapy, but I believe I also became willing to look at some things about Helen I hadn't wanted to face. She functioned better under all the strain and pressure and secretiveness of our affair than she did when things were more normal. That's why the love between us died as soon as the affair was over and the marriage began. When I could look at all this honestly, I began to get over the terrible anger I'd felt toward her since her death. I was angry because being with Helen had cost me so much, my marriage, in many ways my children's love, and the respect of my friends. I guess I felt like I'd been cheated. Charles's attraction to Helen, beautiful and alluring when they first met, Helen soon provided Charles with sexual bliss, blind devotion, and love, bordering on reverence. His strong attraction to her in spite of a stable, fairly satisfying marriage hardly requires an explanation or justification. Quite simply, Helen made it her life's work, from the beginning and throughout all the long years of their affair, to deepen Charles's love for her and to make bearable and even worthwhile his long struggle to be free of his marriage. What does merit explanation is Helen's sudden and patent disinterest in the man for whom she had waited and suffered so long, once he was finally able to freely share a life with her. Why did she love him to distraction while he was married and quickly tire of him when he was not? Because Helen wanted only what she couldn't really have. To tolerate sustained interaction with a man personally and sexually, she needed the guarantee of distance and unattainability that Charles's marriage supplied. Only under those conditions was she able to give herself to him. She could not comfortably endure a genuine partnership that could, freed of the racking pressures of his marriage, develop and deepen on a basis other than their mutual struggle against the world. Helen needed the excitement, tension, and emotional pain of loving an unavailable man in order to relate at all. She had virtually no capacity for intimacy, or even much tenderness, once she was no longer embroiled in the struggle to win Charles. Having been won, he was virtually discarded. Yet through those long years of waiting for him, she gave every appearance of being a woman who loved too much. She genuinely suffered, pined, wept, and wailed for the man she loved but could not truly have. She experienced him as the center of her being, the most important force in her world, until she had him. Then the reality of him as a partner, with the bittersweet romance of their illicit affair removed, failed to rouse her to the thrills of passion she'd enjoyed for 9 years with this same man. Often it is observed that when two people who have been involved for years finally make a commitment to marry each other, something goes out of the relationship, the excitement is lost, and they fall out of love. That this happens is not necessarily because they have stopped trying to please each other. It may be because one or the other or both of them have overstepped their capacity for intimacy by making that very commitment. An open-ended relationship provides the promise of safety from deeper intimacy. With commitment, there is often emotional withdrawal in an effort towards self-protection. This is precisely what happened between Helen and Charles. Charles, for his part, ignored whatever signs there were of Helen's lack of emotional depth because of the flattery he felt from her attention. Far from being a passive victim of her machinations and manipulations, Charles actively refused to acknowledge the part of Helen's character that didn't fit with the view of himself, a view she had fostered, and he wanted to believe that he was enormously lovable and sexually irresistible. He lived in a carefully constructed fantasy world with Helen for many years, unwilling to puncture the illusion his ego had grown to cherish. Much of his anger after Helen's death was at himself, as he belatedly admitted his own denial and the role he had played in creating and perpetuating the fantasy of an all-consuming love, which finally resulted in the most sterile of marriages. Russell, 32, licensed social worker, having received a pardon from the governor, who designs community programs for youthful offenders. The kids I work with are always impressed with that tattoo of my name on my left forearm. It says a lot about the way I used to live. I got it done when I was 17 because I was sure that someday I was going to be lying on the ground dead, and nobody would know who I was. I thought I was a hell of a bad guy. I lived with my mother till I was 7. Then she remarried and her new husband and I didn't get along. I ran away a lot, and in those days they locked you up for that. First it was juvenile hall, then foster homes and more trips to juvenile hall. Pretty soon it was boys camp and then YA, the youth authority. As I got older I was in and out of the local jails, and finally prison. By the time I was 25 I had been in every kind of correctional facility the state of California had to offer, from forest camp to maximum security. Needless to say, I spent a lot more time locked up than I did on the outside during those years. But I still managed to meet Monica. One night in San Jose, a buddy I knew from YA and I were cruising around in this borrowed car. We pulled into a hamburger drive-in and parked next to these two girls. We got to talking and joking with them, and pretty soon we were sitting in the back seat of their car. Well, my buddy was a real ladies' man. He had the coolest line, so whenever there were girls around I let him do all the talking. He could always get a couple of girls interested, but he also got first pick because he was so slick and Did all the work, and I'd have second choice. I had no complaints that night. Because he paired off with this sexy little blonde who was driving, and I ended up with Monica. She was 15. Really pretty, all soft and wide-eyed and interested. She had this really sweet way, right from the beginning, of caring so much. Now, when you've done time, you learn that there are some women who'll think you're a creep and have nothing to do with you. But there are others who get turned on by the whole idea. It fascinates them. They see you as big and bad and they get real seductive, trying to tame you. Or they think you've been hurt and they feel sorry for you and want to help you. Monica was definitely in the category of wanting to help. She was a real nice girl, too. No heavy stuff right away. While my buddy was making it with her girlfriend, Monica, and I took a walk in the moonlight and talked. She wanted to know everything about me. I cleaned up my story quite a bit so I wouldn't scare her off, and I told her a lot of the sad things, like how much my stepfather hated me and some of the crummy foster homes I'd been in where they gave me hand-me-downs and spent the money meant for me on their own kids. While I was talking, she squeezed my hand real hard and patted it and even got tears in her big brown eyes. Man, by the time we said goodbye that night, I was in love. My buddy wanted to tell me every juicy detail of his big score with the blonde, and I didn't even want to listen. Monica had given me her address and phone number, and I was going to call her the next day for sure, but as we were driving out of the city we got stopped by the cops because the car was hot. All I could think about was Monica. I was sure that was the end of it because I'd told her how hard I was trying to clean up my act and go straight. When I was back in YA, I decided to take a chance and write her. I told her I was doing time again, but for something I didn't do, that the cops had arrested me because I had a record. And they didn't like me. Monica wrote right back and kept on writing me just about every day for the next 2 years. All we ever wrote each other about was how much we were in love, how much we missed each other, and what we would do together when I got out. Her mother wouldn't let her meet me in Stockton when I was released, so I took a bus back to San Jose. I was so excited about seeing her again, but really scared about it, too. I guess I was afraid she wouldn't want me after all. So, instead of going to see her right away, I looked up some old buddies, and one thing led to another. We started raising hell, and by the time they finally drove me to Monica's house, 4 days had gone by. I was pretty wrecked. I'd had to get loaded just to have the courage to come see her. I was so afraid she'd tell me to get lost. Her mother was at work, thank God, when the guys dumped me on her sidewalk. Monica came out smiling, so glad to see me even though she hadn't heard from me since I'd hit town. I remember that we went for another of our great walks that day as soon as I wasn't so high. I didn't have any money to take her anywhere and no car either, but she didn't seem to mind then or ever. For a long time I could do no wrong in Monica's eyes. She made excuses for everything I did and didn't do. I was in and out of jail and then prison for years, and she still married me and stuck by me. Her own dad had deserted the family when she was just a little kid. Her mother was real bitter about that. And she didn't like me too well, either. In fact, that's why Monica and I got married. Once when I'd been busted for bad checks and forgery, her mom wouldn't let Monica see me when I was out on bail, so we ran off together and got married. Monica was 18 then. We lived in a hotel for a little while until my trial. She had a job as a waitress, but she quit so she could come to court every day during the trial. Then, of course, I went to prison, and Monica went back home to her mom. They fought so much that she left and moved to the town nearest the prison and worked as a waitress again. It was a college town, and I always hoped she'd go back to school. She really liked school and she was so bright, but she said she didn't want to, she just wanted to wait for me. We'd write and she'd come visit as often as they'd let her. She talked to the prison chaplain about me a lot and kept asking him to talk to me and help me, until I finally asked her not to do that anymore. I hated talking to the guy. I just couldn't relate. Even though she visited, she kept on writing, too, and she'd send all these books and articles about improving yourself. She told me constantly that she was praying for me to change. I wanted to stay out of prison, but I'd been doing time for so long it was all I knew how to do. Well, finally something clicked inside me and I got involved in a program to help me make it out there in the world. I went to school while I was on the inside and learned a trade, plus I finished high school and started on my college education. When I got out, I somehow stayed out of trouble and continued with my education until I had a master's degree in social work. But along the way, I lost my wife. At first, when we were really struggling to make it, we got along okay, but as things got easier and we began to achieve what we'd always hoped for, Monica got angrier and snappier than I'd ever seen her in all those years. Through all those troubles, she left me just when we should have been happiest. I don't even know where she is now. Her mother won't tell me, and I finally decided that it wasn't my business to look for her if she didn't want to be with me. Sometimes I think it was a lot easier for Monica to love an idea of me than to love me in person. We were so in love when we were barely ever together, when all we had were letters and visits and the dream of what we'd have someday. When I started making what we'd wished for a reality, we fell apart. The more middle class we became, the less she liked it. I guess she couldn't feel sorry for me anymore. Russell's attraction to Monica. Nothing in Russell's background prepared him to be emotionally or even physically present to another person in a loving, committed relationship. For most of his life he had actively been seeking a feeling of strength and safety by either running away or engaging in dangerous escapades. Through these highly distracting, tension-generating activities, he sought to avoid his own despair. He used involvement in danger to avoid feeling pain and helplessness at having been emotionally abandoned by his mother. When he met Monica, he was enchanted by her softly appealing looks and her tender attitude toward him. Rather than rejecting him for being bad, she responded to his problems with sincere interest and deep compassion. She immediately communicated that she was willing to be there for him, and it wasn't long before he tested her staying power. When he disappeared, Monica responded by patiently waiting. She seemed to have enough love, stability, and endurance to handle whatever Russell might do. Though it appears that Monica had a great measure of tolerance for Russell and his behavior, actually the exact opposite was true. What neither of these young people consciously realized was that she could be there for him only as long as he was not there for her. As long as he was separated from her, Russell found in Monica the perfect partner, the ideal prisoner's wife. She willingly spent her life waiting and hoping that he would change and that then they could be together. Prison wives like Monica present perhaps the ultimate example of women who love too much. Because they are incapable of any degree of intimacy with a man, they choose instead to live with a fantasy, a dream of how much they will love and be loved someday when their partner changes and becomes available to them. But they can be intimate only in fantasy. When Russell accomplished the nearly impossible and began to go straight and stay out of jail, Monica drifted away. Having him present in her life demanded a threatening level of intimacy. It made her far more uncomfortable than his absence ever had. Nor could day-to-day reality with Russell ever compete with the idealized vision of mutual love she had entertained. There is a saying among convicts that they all have their Cadillacs parked at the curb waiting for them, meaning they entertain an overly idealized version of what life will be like for them when they are back on the streets. In the imagination of prisoners as wives like Monica, what is probably parked at the curb is not the Cadillac symbolizing money and power, but a coach drawn by 6 white horses, representing magically romantic love. How these women will love and be loved, that is their Dream. Along with their convict husbands, they usually find it easier to live with the dream than to struggle to try to make it come true in the real world. What is important to understand is that it appeared that Russell was unable to love with much depth, while Monica, with all her patience and compassion, seemed to be very good at it. In fact, they were both equally deficient in the ability to love intimately. That is why they became partners when they couldn't be together, and why when they could be together their relationship had to end. It is instructive to note that Russell does not have a new partner in his life at this time. He, too, is still struggling with intimacy.